I just realized I wasn't joined by audio. We're having all kinds of fun getting this meeting to work. So let me see if I can present the backlog here. Okay. Bye.
Backwalk.
Yes. So we've got quite a bit in here. I just started going through some of this. I'm not sure how, I didn't get a chance to look at the Cubatum backlog videos yet. I did read through the doc on how y'all do that, but I'm not remembering how you start. If you just like go through all the issues or what. I was just going through them one by one.
So since most of these already have priority tag, you can just go through the more important ones first and assign a milestone for them, like decide if this is supposed to go in the next release or the next pre-release, or do you have a milestone for the next minor release, by the way?
I do have one for 0.2.
Yes.
So I guess we don't have any of these. Slash important soon. This one probably needs to be in one, but not necessarily the next one. This is going to make it possible to use kind in some environments where the host DNS being propagated to the nodes doesn't make sense. There are workarounds. The main one is for if you have like a Docker and Docker Kubernetes pod, in some cases that may cause like the in cluster DNS to get propagated through to the kind nodes, which gets a bit weird because they're like on another Docker network and they're trying to talk to the like core DNS in your cluster, and that's not ideal. You can work around that by changing the pod DNS settings, but kind probably has some use case to do this as well.
So this is a strange one, because the user reported that, so near the bottom he says that he is doing cluster create, And
So is it that his user doesn't have access to Docker and his sudoer doesn't have access to kind? Is that
yeah, maybe that's the case, but we don't feed a good message for that. We just, yeah, we feed.
this seems like a 1.0, like we should, like in general, error messaging needs improving, but we're not going to get all that sorted out for the next minor release.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay, so this one is already milestone. We don't have a milestone. We should make a milestone for 0.2. We have a, so that's another thing. Do you all use a milestone and an issue, or just one or the other?
In what sense? We do have milestones. We also have issues.
Yes, but so there's milestone and there's actually the project.
So projects. So kubeadm, for kubeadm, the repo kubeadm, we don't use projects yet.
Okay. Yeah, so what I'm trying to figure out is, like, right now I have things both in a milestone and in a project for 1.0, and I'm not sure if that makes sense for
So I think projects are, yeah, I think projects are really useful when you start combining issues from multiple repos. Otherwise, you can just look at a milestone. It's
yeah, I'm wondering if we maybe should just switch. I mean, so projects are also kind of nice and for to some respect for tracking things, but
it's kind of duplicating.
yeah, it's kind of duplicating work and tracking to have it in both. I'll just, let's maybe do both just for now since we already have them, but for the next one, maybe just use a milestone. Yeah, so this one definitely, I need to manually push some images for the next release. We're looking at automating, but that's probably not going to make it into the next one. I would like to do this in the next release. We're doing work to improve the configuration. I'd like to keep it down to just 2 alpha versions each release, and eventually get to something, if not literally beta-ish.
So for the next minor, do you think we should bump the version of the config? And if that's the case, what changes should we make for the next minor?
I don't know if we've gotten that issue yet, but we should be adding host path mounting. So actually, diverting off for a second, I wrote up something over the weekend to cover like how we can do some of these things. In particular, I think how we can solve, I want to configure things about the containers. We don't want to just literally plumb through Docker flags, because then not just start for our own purposes, but users will be broken when they try to use their config between different Docker versions or something. I did some digging, and I think we can do exactly what Kubernetes does for this and use the container runtime interface to identify, I guess I don't actually have a good link for this here. Anyhow, there's a specification for like what it looks like to configure DNS or to configure mounts or that sort of thing in the container runtime interface. We can use that to guide how we talk to Docker without actually using the container runtime interface itself yet. And so, for example, that has a definition of what a mount looks like, and it maps pretty well to pretty much all container runtimes, because that's like the entire idea behind the container runtime interface. So we should add at least host path mounting, I think, is a pretty obvious one that is blocking some use cases and relatively simple to implement. The only reason we haven't added it yet has been that Docker's host path mounts are pretty much just flags with structured values in them, and figuring out how we want to plumb that through.
So do you think that we can refactor the whole usage for Docker in kind to move to the CRI in 1.0?
Maybe. I think instead what we can do is we can make sure that the types and the things that we support look like what the CRI has, without actually, I mean, so another thing is the Docker shim in Kubernetes has somewhat of a questionable future, but it shouldn't be a problem for us to maintain just the subset that we want. I mean, we essentially already have a Docker shim today. I'm not advocating that we like drop that work or that we start trying to like actively support other container runtimes right away, but just if nothing else, to avoid being coupled to specific releases of Docker, that was one of the problems that was solved in Kubernetes by defining this interface.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that we might not be able to refactor everything for 1.0.
I don't think we should refactor everything, but as we add new features for configuring things, we should look at the container runtime interface to, like, for example, if we add no level DNS config, we should look at what does the container runtime interface support and what data structure does it use to describe this, and target that.
Yeah, and the host path mounting as well.
Right. Host path mounting was the thing that drove this, but as I looked, it seems pretty applicable to basically everything we do talking to Docker from the host. And I think long term, it probably makes sense to actually use the container runtime, and that will allow people to use whatever container, or actually use a container runtime interface, and that will allow people to use alternate, possibly even say more secured container runtimes or things to run this.
Yeah, hopefully we're not like blocked on a feature that is missing in the CRI.
Right. So far, it doesn't look like that. I think in general that will also solve some other things. Like I know we have a PR that we still need to get back to about Podman support, and instead of trying to hope that like these flags in the command line are never going to change underneath us, if we can have just one layer of indirection between. Right now, the amount of things that we expose are pretty much you get nodes, and that doesn't make any. We don't make any agreement to users about what kinds of flags we're going to pass through, but as soon as we start doing things like host path mounts or DNS config, we're going to start saying, okay, we're going to set these values on Docker, and unless we add some sort of shim, it is literally Docker flags. So basically what I'm saying here is as we start adding any sort of shim, we should look to the container runtime for what that shim should look like.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, definitely.
Let's see. I think most of these are milestone. This one, I'm not actually sure if we can solve this. I believe this is actually, we might have to look at what Minikube does here. The Kubeatom just creates an admin user on each cluster, so the contexts are going to be the same. We'd have to add some kind of user provisioning, I think, if we were going to do this. I'm not sure if this is actually something we need or want to solve.
So kubeadm has an extra command to generate kubeconfig for multiple users.
Okay. I think maybe this is a like 2019 ideal thing and not necessarily any particular release. It probably would be good to have for 1.0, but I don't think I want to block on this because it is perfectly possible to use kind without this.
Yeah, you can also change the priority to something like a backlog or something like that.
Yeah, I think this is backlogged. This one should be fixed. This one is definitely 1.0. I think it might be fixed, but we need to follow up with everyone to make sure that it is working for them. I don't have an environment like this to verify.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, that's the problem. I was following this because it's the same situation I had. I don't have a proper environment, so I need to take a look at this because this morning I saw that this person is reporting that he was still having the problem, but the problem was that he was passing. He was using localhost as a proxy. That made no sense because localhost is not available from inside the Docker. So
right.
I tried to follow all with this person to see that he has a
Are
proper
you
environment. Otherwise, I need to figure out how to do it.
are you in the Kubernetes SIGs org?
Yep.
It doesn't seem to.
No. I don't think you are. It says contributor instead of member.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
If you want to file a Kubernetes SIGs membership request, I'd be happy to +1 that and assign some of these things to you.
Okay. That will be fine. I will follow this issue. Okay. So,
Okay. Yeah, and this is did that just I'm not sure if I actually got that. Yeah, this is 1.0 for sure. I think this as well. This should actually be pretty straightforward to add and record, and I can think of a number of use cases where this might be more convenient, including if you actually just want it to be your main kubeconfig file, and that's up to you if you specify that. I don't think this should be a major change.
Also, it's a kind of like a corner case. Like not a lot of users want this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we can punt it out of 1.0 if we need, but I think we can probably get it in before then, and it shouldn't be a huge thing to do. This one, use a container IP address. This one is actually definitely blocking some use cases. I did some more experimentation with using Kind for some internal testing the past week, and I found a number of cases where you want to run a workload inside the cluster and use the credentials, and if you're using the kubeconfig that we generate, that will look like the kubeconfig you need to talk from outside the cluster, and that won't work. So this would actually also be relatively straightforward, and is definitely something we need. I don't really want to put too much more in the next release, though. I'm actually hoping to get one out this week, just so we can keep getting incremental small releases out instead of nebulous implement all of the things, massive changes. We actually have this. It could use some more details, but this has definitely been ongoing. It could use a lot more information, but we have something up now. I'll leave that in 1.0. Pre-flight checks. This has been a frequent one where if Kind were able to simply detect that like the host doesn't have enough memory or something like that, it would save a lot of confusion in Q&A, I think, if we can try to detect some of these host environment incompatibilities.
Yeah, definitely. Like the user case, like is this user allowed to use Docker even?
Yeah, that like just that one alone will probably solve a lot of questions. And I think it's just easier if we can get the tool to detect it and suggest the workaround. Eventually, what I'd like to do once we have the site stabilized is actually link out to known issues on there as well, where we can have more detailed information on the known issues page. Okay, so that's all of the important soon. Long term. This one, I think we can also get this in 1.0. And I've actually been thinking about how we can support having the CNIs preloaded and basically just put the manifests in the image and allow selecting over those and have a default, and then allow also supplying your own manifest with the understanding that it's not supported per se, but you can certainly supply your own and make sure it works for the CNI. And that should also, the supply your own version should be pretty simple.
I mean, we have a bit of a problem with the multitude of CNIs available out there. People, like everybody wants a different one. That's a problem. So in an offline scenario, we can exclude all these outside of the node image. And if the users pre-pull the images for the CNI plugin, and also if they have the manifest pre-pulled, we can allow them to apply this way.
Right, we can give them some tooling to ensure that some extra images are loaded, and that their manifest is applied instead of whatever we were going to apply.
Yes, so we just have to feed some values in the config or something like that.
Yeah, I think that again that should be pretty straightforward as we in the config. Same thing for this. This is sort of a subset of that.
Isn't there an issue for a generic add-on?
For what?
For adding, add-ons, because what we are mentioning is like something you could use for other, not only for the CNI, or whatever
That
other.
one, there is. I think I think I
there
kind
was.
of. I think so. CNI is an add-on that we absolutely have to ship because you can't really have a multi-node cluster without it. For more general add-ons, I'd also like to find an answer, but there's a distinction in that I think for other add-ons, we probably don't want to be shipping those in the image. Whereas like CNI, we definitely want to ship at least a CNI that you can use without any fuss. But for like add-ons, it's going to get very tricky to figure out like which add-on should we be trying to manage. And I think we want to try to manage that externally. And SIG cluster lifecycle has some ongoing about this.
So the idea is for the CNI is to actually put that in the image.
Right. Yeah, because it's like kind of a minimum viable cluster thing to have a CNI.
We should probably put weave at least, and that's it.
Yeah. And I mean, if they're small enough, it might make sense to ship one or two, but it's also an issue of like I'd rather we don't ourselves ship things that we're not guaranteeing work as much as possible, but we can leave extension points for people to like try to swap on their own.
Okay.
Same thing with like the CRI type stuff. Like we will probably still say, this works against Docker. That's what we test against primarily, but if you want to use it against other CRI, it should work. And maybe longer term, we'd wind up adding more testing or something.
Yeah, and the add-on situation is super complicated at the moment. So in kubeadm, we ship a couple of essential add-ons that are kubeproxy, and the other one is kubedns or core DNS. And we don't manage anything else. And I think that for now, Kind should do the same. And eventually, once we have a better method for exposing add-ons, maybe we can apply the same for Kind.
I believe there's at least one KEP open discussing an option for this, and I have reached out to the author, Justin Santa Barbara, to discuss what that makes sense for that, because even if we don't formally adopt it, we can at least try it out, because Kind would actually probably be a pretty good way to test such a tool. And if it works well, we can either bundle or recommend some options for this.
Yeah, operators are going to be very interesting.
Yeah. So this is another one that I think is almost entirely just documentation. Actually, we might want to add a special feature specifically to turn on alphas, but alternatively, we can say you provide a kubeadm config patch and it looks like this, and we can document what it looks like. So it's a little bit hairy to do through the config, but
this looks like a Kind documentation pretty much, because we already support it.
It's technically possible right now. It might be worth discussing actually having more first-class support for this, because I believe the way you have to do it right now is you have to set some flags on a couple of components. And it's going to be a really common case to turn on alpha features for testing.
The problem is that some features are only applied to some components. And,
yeah, so at minimum, we should document this, and that shouldn't be a big deal. We should also, look at whether or not we need to make it easier. I think a number of tools like Minikube offer a flag to add features like this turned on. We could probably at least add a configuration value if the patches wind up being unwieldy. I believe I took a stab at this and they were a little bit, but it might be better now.
Yeah, so on the kubeadm side, we decided to turn the config into a Swiss Army knife instead and let the users do whatever they want. Because features come and go, and a lot of the alpha features don't make it to beta even.
Oh, to be clear, what I mean is a field where you can set the alpha features value, and we don't parse that at all. We just pass it along. to all of the various places it needs to be passed along.
Okay.
We should revisit that one. Okay, so I think that's actually all of the important ones. Most of these have previously been triaged as 2019 or 1.0. We do also have backlog. We should take a look through. And this is the only one that doesn't have a milestone, and I'm gonna punt that. This is talking about the command line spinner, and that's going to be revisited soon as I start taking a pass through technical debt this week. But it's not important. It might be a nice thing to have, like, say the build also have one, or if we remove it from the main one, then we should have the same in both places. This one, similarly, this would be nice to do, but Klog itself seems kind of up in the air. I wanted to sync with the cluster API folks about this at some point. I believe they've been using it.
Did you see the thread by Patrick Oley discussing with Tim Hawkin the logger stuff?
I did skim through that. I didn't see anything super conclusive out of that.
So yeah, we should follow up after something is decided there, in my opinion.
That sounds good to me. Yeah, I think Klog is eventually going to have traction just by being the de facto thing, but it's not clear to me if it's like worth the effort to switch just yet. I think it might be nicer for embedding. Like, I know cluster API is, I believe they are embedding kind now. It would be nice to use the same logging backend.
Yeah, so Patrick is bringing the same problem I brought. With basically, when you import a backend, it imposes a library on the front end. So currently, if you import kubeadm, and if you design some sort of a front end, you have to use kwalk as well. And the same applies to the cluster API. Everything has to use kwalk.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm okay with that for any front end as long as the backend part is pluggable enough. And ideally, we just use the same thing that the overall ecosystem is. I think we care more about the first party ecosystem right now, i.e. other Kubernetes sub-projects.
Yeah. And Logger might be the solution as an interface for backends and stuff, but we should see, because people are still not agreeing on Logger.
Right. Yeah. And it looks like all the rest of these are actually, I don't know if there's a way to actually maybe query if there isn't a milestone, but we could just take a through. These two are also unclear. I think we need to revisit whether or not those even need to be separate. It might actually be reasonable to even say, like, have like an alpha subcommand for upgrade or something. I think we just need more details on what we're actually trying to do in upgrade.
So this can happen in the next cycle, because so personally, cluster life cycle do not have a need for upgrades this cycle. And to my understanding, the 1.0 release is the end of this cycle. So
yeah, I put that in 2019 goals just now. I think we need to circle back on things like upgrade, but they're definitely not a immediate thing. So I guess that's pretty much the backlog. I'm going to see about pulling up the
I wanted to see what items we have for the next minor release.
Oh, sure. I was gonna just get a couple of announcements before we finish the meeting, since we started late. We're a bit low on time. So we actually don't have, oh, there we go. So, wait a sec. Oh, that's because they're mostly in the project currently. I would need to backfill them into the milestone. So we need to build new images. I'd like to drop v1 alpha 1 and add v1 alpha 3 with the at least a host path mounting. And I'd also like to fix preloading the CNI, though that one might be okay to come back to, since hopefully the proxy issues at least fix most users' immediate concern. But I also think that dealing with CNIs is something that's increasingly coming up, and it should make the cluster boot faster. And I've been poking at how to do this for a while now, so I think we can probably get that one in as well. We already fixed getting some issues up and switching the name flag behavior, so we can get those breaking changes in soon. I guess the other one that's not in here is I'd like to figure out some more about how to split out some of the networking config, like the load balancer, and not have the explicit load balancer node. I know we have a PR out to make load balancers implicit on v1 alpha 2, but I'm kind of thinking more of like, you know, v1 alpha 2 is also going to go away eventually. We can take it away pretty much anytime we want since it's alpha. You know, long term, I think it doesn't make sense for the cluster load balancer to be configured as a node because it's not a Kubernetes node. And even if we add support for other load balancers, the control plane load balancer is always going to be special because it also needs things like the certificates.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the list of nodes that kind generates, the load balancer is still a kind node because it's based on a node image. That's the only argument if it's a node or not.
Right, but everything else that we allow you to say about a kind node doesn't make sense. So I think really we just need to expose the image setting for that one, and we can put it in somewhere in the config structure where there's space to add other options later if we do wind up needing them. I don't think that's super likely right now. We are going to wind up having other networking options that are global to the cluster though, like the Docker network being used. And for that, I'm thinking we probably want to sort out like some other field in the config that handles these things that is distinct from the node list.
Yeah, I think ideally you should open a Google Doc and like example your like what is the config you are looking for, how
Right.
is it, and we can then execute on that.
Right, that's why I don't have it in the milestone yet, is because I haven't written anything down.
But these changes are there for the next minor, or are they for the?
I was hoping to get them in the next alpha API version, which I was also hoping to get in this. But if they don't make the cut, I think that's fine.
Because we are super pressed on time right now. So the work on the config is very tedious. It's not that easy to change the config, unfortunately.
Yes, and I'm hoping to make some of those things more straightforward as well. We'll see. So I want to get a couple of announcements in. Hopefully we have some KubeCon talks at Barcelona if anyone's interested. Right now, James and I are signed up to do KubeCon Barcelona. We couldn't make today's meeting. Potentially, depending on how that goes, we can also switch the speakers around. That's going to be a sig-testing deep dive, and we're going to look at how kind works, how it's used for Kubernetes, and maybe some amount of how you can test other things on it, but I'm holding off that on. Hopefully Liz and I will have a talk about testing Kubernetes apps on kind. We'll have to get more details about those out. Yeah, we'll see. Liz submitted the CFP, it's through. We got through the project board. I looked at Tesker this morning, it's doing fine. The last thing is the docs site is looking pretty good now and covers quite a bit. It could use some more work, PR is welcome, but we do have like a decent quick start now and some other things. I've also filed an issue to attempt to get an actual Kates.io subdomain for this instead of linking to Netlify so that we can potentially move off of Netlify if we need to in the future. Fingers crossed on that one. I'm looking to get kind.sigs.kates.io matching our API namespace. If we get that, then I'm also looking to do a clever thing and have kind.sigs.kates.io/v1 alpha 3, for example, link to the Go docs or redirect to the Go docs. for that type, which will be neat. If anyone has any ideas here, I'd really appreciate that. I think the next really big thing to do is flesh out the contributing docs, which I'm going to talk to George some more about. In particular, I think we should get some meta docs for how to contribute to the docs.
Yeah, that's if we don't have the docs in the contributing repo, a community repo. I mean, we should use those instead. I'm not sure if.
Well, what I mean is we don't necessarily need to fill out all this, but we should have like a page and it should link to these things. And similarly in the repo, we should link to this. We'll need at least a little bit of our own details because we need to cover things like you should install Hugo and here's the make command to run to browse the site locally. We don't need a heavy guide, but we should have at least something that covers the repo specific details.
So I've been contributing a lot to the website repo, and I don't have a Hugo setup, by the way. I just hope that my PR is going to build.
Okay. Well, I mean, we don't have to, require it, but we can at least outline how you would browse them locally if you want to.
Yes. Okay.
Since there is the preview on the PRs.
Hugo fails to build locally for me for some reason. Anyway.
We can also look at having a Dockerized local Hugo setup.
Yeah, that's going to make things easier. Yes, definitely. I found another bug in the deployer. I'm going to send the PR later for it.
Thank you. Also, Lubomir has made some pretty excellent kubetest integration. We should get that set up in some more places and make sure that we've got everything hammered down there. I know we found 1 or 2 problems with it.
Yeah.
I will have to follow up on your PRs again for getting some cluster lifecycle jobs up with it.
Yeah, I'm looking at test grids, and I have to send a little PR related to the kubectl config, the way the kind deployer is obtaining the kubectl config. And so I had a question here. So how should we document the deployer?
That's a good question. For now, I think probably just updating the community EDUI testing doc where we mention how to do local. We can mention that you can do this with kind and have some limited docs. Long term, I'm not sure. I think unless you're actually testing Kubernetes, I'd rather people not depend on kubetest, but
yeah, I wonder if we should even document this because
I think we should document it at least a little bit, just to the same degree that local up cluster is. I don't know if we need to do more than that.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. I just want to get the deployer working first because.
Right. Yeah. No. Definitely, we should get it working first. And thank you for all of your work on that.
No problem. I had a related question to deployers and test. Do you think that we can have a kind job in pre-submits anytime soon?
Yes, I think that is entirely possible, especially if we stick to, say, the parallel safe conformance tests. I'm a little loath to. I guess there's always an awkward thing of I'm one of the main people that actually maintains what we run in pre-submit, and I don't really want to be selling my own solution. But I'm happy to help with that, and I do think that it makes sense and it is something we should look towards. But I want to make sure that this is, say, SIG cluster lifecycle agrees, and that this is not just me or me plus you doing it.
Yeah, because Kubernetes anywhere is super broken, and it's much easier for us to use the packages, the job for the packages that I wrote over the weekend.
Right.
And with conjunction with a PR blocking job for kind.
We're also we're in a bad state right now where we only run GCE because the AWS account for KOps testing is still not fixed.
Yeah.
It's a work in progress. We need it for cluster API as well.
Yes, but it's indeterminate when it will be fixed as well. And they have suggested that we go ahead and do move it out of pre-submit and just use post-submit and CI jobs. So it would be kind of nice to run anything that isn't the cluster/GCE scripts.
Yeah. You know my perspective of running cloud providers in pre-submits anyway. I'm not gonna.
that has been a separate discussion in sig testing as well.
Yeah.
There's upsides and downsides. That one will definitely be interesting long term as the cloud providers move out of the core repo.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, my biggest concern is that like we should add this, but it needs to be another tool. There's so many things that are only covered by actually running a cloud provider that are going to be very difficult for us to test.
Yeah.
When we're talking about testing Kubernetes itself.
I mean, yeah, Kubernetes anywhere is using Terraform, a bunch of JSON parsers, uploading to a GCE cluster, downloading kubeconfigs from the GCE clusters. You know, it's
Right.
using the packages also.
Yeah, getting this to work is just like a really fast signal would be something that would, like, I would personally appreciate, but it, you know, making sure that it is something that is actually helpful for everyone is important too, as opposed to just like, we want this.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone else has anything they want to discuss or ask about, I'm going to hang around since we started like 20 minutes late, but we are over time if anyone's got other things to do.
Hi guys, my name is Arvinder. I'm pretty much new to this project. My question was more around IPv6 support.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give you more context, like what I've been working on, who I am. So I work for Ericsson Open Source, and I've been working on adding IPv6 functionality to Kube Router. And I'm also working on the forthcoming dual stack integration that's going to happen with Kubernetes. So in that context, I came across Kind because there's been some work on adding a CI based on IPv6 support. Somebody by the name of Dane LeBlanc had worked on a Docker and Docker-based approach for IPv6 CI.
Mm-hmm.
Something similar with Kind would be like really awesome, I think. I personally use a dev environment which is based on Vagrant. But yeah, I guess in general, my question is about IPv6 support. And
so it's something that I think would make a lot of sense to do in Kind. It's not something that we've targeted yet, just because there are lots of other small things that need doing, like code cleanup and things. But it's definitely something I'd really love to see. If you're interested on working that, just filing issues and proposing changes here and whatnot would be really helpful. I'm not exactly certain what all needs to go on for that. Similarly, so I work on a lot of Kubernetes' CI and test infra. Basically, everything we have access to is like KOps on AWS or Kubernetes anywhere on GCE or other things on GCE, and we don't have IPv6, so most of us don't really have expertise with like what needs to change for that to work. But that effort does seem pretty important, and it's unfortunate that the previous one kind of fell through. I'd love to see Kind fix that.
I had a question related to IPv6 here. Has anybody tested kubeadm if it's working okay with IPv6? Because I saw some recent PRs about that. Because without kubeadm, we cannot get Kind to work. We have to fix kubeadm first.
right, that's a good point actually. So for my own dev environment or my own dev cluster, I don't use kubeadm. I use a more like conventional approach or like old approach of just starting various components inside VMs with appropriate flags. But yeah, definitely that's one of the things I can definitely go look at. I like kubeadm. I like the approach you guys are using, and having support there would be an additional plus. I think there's just so many projects that are coming together, and that so many different projects need to be changed to have IPv6 support. But
Yeah, I definitely hear that. We do, as you said, we do use Cubatum for everything, and I think we intend to stay that way. It's important that we work with other projects within the core community. So starting to figure out what needs to be fixed there would be a great step. And then whatever we learn from that, we can apply to Kind itself as well.
I think I saw some. So somebody was saying that IPv6 was broken. So they started sending PRs for CubeADM to fix IPv6, and we applied the PR. So to my understanding, currently CubeADM works fine with IPv6, except that we don't have test signal for it, and nobody knows what the state of that is. You know, so if somebody comes to the Kind project and says, "Hey, CubeADM already works with IPv6. We just need to apply these couple of knobs to Kind, and then we can just proceed and enable the feature."
Yeah, and further, we would want to actually set up some CI jobs doing this. Similarly, we've been doing some work to test HA clusters with Kind for similar reasons that like it's been difficult to get CI for that elsewhere, but it's pretty cheap to set up something like this with Kind.
Yes.
yeah, that sounds good.
Thanks for coming, by the way.
Oh, no
I
problem.
appreciate that. If anyone else has anything, otherwise we should probably call it here. I know, Pablo, I also want to get back to you more on the machine provisioning thing. I've been asking some more people with experience in that area about their thoughts on that. And generally, I think everyone thinks that it's a good idea. It's just sort of like, probably it should come a bit later once we've sorted out some other things.
You are on mute, Pablo.
Okay. Now?
Hi. Yeah,
Oh,
I do think that is a really great idea in general, and I've talked to a few more people that also think that like it would be pretty interesting to test the cluster API in this way. So I think we're all in agreement there. It's just not sure like what all we need to do in Kind and like how prioritized that is versus like getting some of the other fixes and early releases out.
Okay. Now, but what I'm doing now is I'm just hacking around and trying to figure out what the concrete requirements. I said the other day, I doing kind of crap hack just to make it work and understand the requirements. I'm finding some interesting stuff, and I will basically giving you feedback on what is the real requirements. I'm actually right now implementing all the machine controller stuff in the side of the cluster API. I'm starting doing that. I have a skeleton for that. My next task is trying to figure out, the first thing is trying to create a cluster, a Kind cluster from there. The main issue that we already commented the other day, that's probably the first one, is that how to call Kind from inside Kind. Because because you need to create a node, for instance, or call from something which is running inside, and you need to call back to Kind. So, but that's more or less the first roadblock
We
I
can
found.
probably solve that with a host path mount.
Yeah, that's the idea, but that's probably why and that issue which is open, we can probably try to figure out how to do it.
Or implement some sort of a callback.
Yeah, but then we have to have a persistent running services. We can get back to this. I would also say I think Liz here would probably be someone that we'd want to talk to about this. I think the AWS cluster API implementation is doing some of this.
That's correct. I'm working on a EDE test that will use Kind to provision the meta cluster and then use actual AWS credentials to provision an AWS cluster, blocked, of course, on the same AWS problems everybody else is having.
Right. So Pablo is looking at some interesting stuff where we could have a Kind meta cluster provision a Kind cluster just to exercise the cluster API components.
Yeah, we were talking about in the cluster API meetings, Pablo. I don't know if you were there, if you were even.
Yep, I was.
Yeah, sorry, I had faces, names.
No, don't worry.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a lot of interest in the parts of cluster API where that sort of thing would be useful. We don't want to we don't want to go overboard and test a whole bunch of stuff where we're basically just testing our mocks, but
right.
Definitely I think there's a lot of interest in having some, just like, oh, you can actually list nodes and the machine sets actually work the way we expect them to. I think there's definitely interest in that happening.
Which meeting is that?
God, I don't know. Let me look at the
I'm
calendar.
trying to find like some of these days that they're so stacked on each other. I don't know which.
It's the AWS provider meeting, I think.
Oh, okay. In that case, I think that one conflicts with the release team meeting, unfortunately. But I might be able to come to some of those occasionally.
Community meeting.
I'm attending that one regularly, so I can bring some feedback from
I guess
there.
I can maybe sort of the video or something. Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear what people think about this. I don't know enough about the cluster API. From what I do know, I think this does make sense for testing parts of it, and I'd love to help with that long term. But I'd also just independently like to get more up to speed on what's going on with the cluster API itself. I've been talking to some more people here about that. I think we're also interested in using this for testing actual cloudy clusters eventually.
And then we have to run the whole thing into a Docker container somewhere.
It'll be great. It'll be great. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Also on that note, I'm going to be pushing updates to like all of our CI and kind today because of the run C exploit. So that's fun. We are definitely keeping a close eye on the rootless work. I don't think it's going to land in Kubernetes for some time because there's some major kubelet functionality that doesn't actually exist when in the rootless patches, but it is possible to run Docker-D, Container-D, Cryo, rootless now as upstream as of like a week or two ago. But Kubernetes is going to need more work. I also synced up with some Node people about C groups v2 someday where we can actually properly nest these. I think the future for making this more secure is bright, but today it's kind of scary. I will send a note to the channel when we are using updated Docker inside of Kind.
Yeah. So what version is the root patches? What versions are they going to target in Docker?
Which root patches? Docker?
Yeah.
So these went into master. I'm not sure if they're in a release yet, but they also like we can't really leverage the rootless yet for a couple of reasons, including the fact that like we can't run Kubernetes in that way yet.
Yes.
But long term, we should definitely be looking to do that. There's some other things where like on Linux you need like some distros don't have the functionality you need for this enabled by default. Hopefully that will improve long term as well. And that's something we can maybe add a pre-flight check for or something, or an option.
Yeah, that's for future versions of Kind.
Right. So this is not a today thing, but today makes it more relevant because of the run C escape.
Yeah, I need to read more about this. I'm only saw the title.
Short version is run C escape applies to like basically all released versions of run C as far as I know, which is essentially all major container runtimes. And it has two modes. One, you run a malicious image. It can potentially get out and replace the run C binary on the host if you're running this as root. The other one is if you make an exec to an image that has had malicious modifications to its file system, it can potentially get out. Mitigations are things like SE Linux or having a read-only copy of these binaries on the host. We can't guarantee that since we don't control the host, so we need to get the run C patched.
So this is a great day for the security people.
Yeah, this is a really great day for all the container security people. They're all like, stop using root.
Yeah.
Wow. Kind is bad about this, so we should fix that long term.
Definitely.
As it becomes available. And with that, I think we've added our extra 20 minutes more or less. So unless anybody else has anything else, I'm going to close this now and thank Aaron for getting this sorted out.
Have a good one.
Thank you all for coming despite all the Zoom mishaps.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one.